The roots of Japan's medieval period stretch back to ancient times, when the islands of Japan were first inhabited and organized into complex societies. The story begins with the Jomon period, which lasted from about 14,000 BCE to 300 BCE. During this time, Japan was inhabited by hunter-gatherer communities, known for their unique pottery, which is considered among the oldest in the world. These early societies were largely isolated from the rest of Asia, developing unique cultural practices over millennia. The Jomon people lived a semi-sedentary lifestyle, depending on fishing, hunting, and foraging, and creating one of the world's earliest forms of settled life. However, it was the Yayoi period, beginning around 300 BCE and lasting until 300 CE, that laid the foundations for Japan's later medieval era. During the Yayoi period, rice cultivation was introduced to Japan, transforming the economy and society. The people of the Yayoi period are believed to have migrated from the Korean peninsula or continental Asia, bringing with them advanced agricultural techniques, metallurgy, and the concept of social hierarchy. As a result, Yayoi society began to differentiate itself from the Jomon, forming more organized, hierarchical communities, and rice farming led to the establishment of settled villages. The shift from a hunter-gatherer society to one based on rice farming marked a major turning point in Japan's history, as it led to the accumulation of surplus wealth, which allowed certain families and clans to rise in prominence. These clans began to compete for land and resources, setting the stage for future power struggles that would define Japan's medieval era. By the late Yayoi period, Japan was divided into small regional states ruled by powerful chieftains. These states often competed with one another, sometimes forming alliances and at other times engaging in warfare. By the 3rd century CE, the influence of the continent, particularly China, began to have a more pronounced effect on Japanese political and cultural development. Chinese texts from this period mention a powerful queen, Himiko, who ruled a confederation of states known as Yamatai. Himiko was a shaman queen, and her reign is considered a precursor to the rise of centralized authority in Japan. Although much of her story is shrouded in mystery, she represents an early form of political unity that would later evolve into the imperial system. The period that followed, known as the Kofun period 300 CE, 538 CE, is named after the large, keyhole-shaped burial mounds, or kofun, built for the elite. This period marks the emergence of a more centralized, stratified society. During the Kofun period, powerful clans like the Yamato began to dominate the political landscape of Japan, laying the groundwork for the establishment of the imperial state. The Yamato clan, based in the Kinai region near modern-day Nara, claimed descent from the sun goddess Amaterasu, which would become a central element of Japanese imperial legitimacy for centuries. It was during this time that the Yamato rulers began to consolidate their power over other regional clans, gradually forming what we might consider the early Japanese state. They did so through military conquest, alliances, and marriage politics, all of which foreshadowed the feudal practices that would come to define the medieval period. The Yamato rulers also sought to legitimize their authority by adopting elements of Chinese culture, particularly Confucianism and Buddhism, which had begun to spread from the Korean peninsula. The introduction of Buddhism to Japan in the 6th century marked a significant cultural and political turning point. While Confucianism offered a model of governance based on hierarchy and loyalty, Buddhism introduced new religious practices and ideas about the nature of power, life, and the afterlife. The Yamato court embraced Buddhism, seeing it as a way to strengthen its authority, and patronized the construction of temples and the spread of Buddhist teachings. This move not only enhanced the prestige of the Yamato rulers but also began to intertwine religion and politics in Japan, a relationship that would continue throughout the medieval period. The period from the 6th to 8th centuries saw the rise of the Japanese imperial state, particularly during the Ashikaga period, 538 CE, 710 CE, and the Nara period, 710 CE, 794 CE. During the Ashikaga period, Japan underwent significant political and cultural reforms aimed at centralizing power in the hands of the emperor and his court. One of the most important figures of this era was Prince Shotoku, 574 to 622 CE, who is credited with promoting Buddhism and Confucian ideals, as well as creating Japan's first constitution. The 17-article constitution was not a legal document in the modern sense, but rather a set of moral and political guidelines that emphasized harmony, respect for authority, and the centrality of the emperor. These reforms continued during the Nara period, when Japan's first permanent capital, Haijokyo, modern-day Nara, was established in 710. The Nara period is characterized by a strong Chinese influence, as the Japanese court adopted Chinese-style governance, including a centralized bureaucracy, legal codes, and a tax system based on rice production. Buddhism flourished during this period, with the construction of grand temples such as Todaiji in Nara, home to the Great Buddha, a massive bronze statue that remains one of Japan's most iconic cultural monuments. However, the centralization of power in the imperial court during the Nara period also laid the groundwork for the decentralization that would define Japan's medieval era. While the imperial government sought to control the provinces through appointed officials, local clan leaders and aristocrats continued to hold significant power in their regions. Over time, these local elites would challenge the authority of the imperial court, leading to the emergence of a feudal system in which power was decentralized and divided among regional lords. The Heian period, 794 CE 1185 CE, represents a crucial transitional phase between ancient and medieval Japan. During this time, the capital was moved from Nara to Heian-kyo, modern-day Kyoto, marking the beginning of nearly 4 centuries of imperial rule from Kyoto. The Heian period is often remembered as a time of cultural brilliance, particularly in literature, art, and court life. The aristocracy enjoyed great wealth and power, and the imperial court became the center of refined culture, as depicted in classic works of literature like The Tale of Genji by Murasaka Shikibu and The Pillow Book by Sei Shonagon. Despite the cultural achievements of the Heian period, it was also a time of growing political instability. The imperial court's authority began to wane as powerful aristocratic families, such as the Fujiwara clan, gained increasing control over political affairs through marriage alliances and manipulation of the court's bureaucracy. The Fujiwara effectively ruled Japan for much of the Heian period, while the emperor became a symbolic figurehead with little real power. As the imperial court became more focused on the rituals and pleasures of court life, regional power shifted into the hands of provincial governors and military leaders. This shift in power, along with the rise of the warrior class or samurai, set the stage for the emergence of a feudal system that would dominate Japan's medieval period. By the end of the Heian period, Japan was divided between the aristocratic elites of the capital and the military leaders who controlled the provinces, laying the foundation for the wars and conflicts that would define the medieval era. As the Heian period progressed, Japan's political structure began to change in ways that would shape its medieval era. The central imperial court in Kyoto, which had once held considerable power, gradually weakened as aristocratic families like the Fujiwara clan amassed significant political control through marriage alliances and administrative maneuvering. While the court life in Heian-kyo, Kyoto, continued to dazzle with cultural and literary achievements, it masked a growing instability. Beneath the surface, the provinces were becoming increasingly restless, and a new class of warriors, the samurai, was emerging to challenge the status quo. The samurai class was born out of necessity. As imperial power weakened, provincial governors found it increasingly difficult to maintain order in their territories. Banditry, rivalries between powerful local families, and the occasional rebellion became common. The imperial court often relied on these provincial leaders to enforce laws and collect taxes, but over time, these leaders began to develop their own private armies to defend their lands and assert their authority. These private armies were composed of skilled warriors, later known as samurai, who would play a central role in Japan's medieval history. By the late Heian period, the samurai had become a dominant force in Japanese society, particularly in the provinces, where they acted as enforcers for the aristocracy and, increasingly, as rulers in their own right. The term samurai itself comes from the Japanese verb saburao, meaning to serve. Initially, the samurai were loyal retainers of powerful aristocratic families, but over time, they evolved into a distinct warrior class with their own code of conduct and a strong sense of honor and duty. The samurai were not only warriors but also landowners, and their wealth and power were derived from the land they controlled. This created a system where land and military power became closely intertwined, a key feature of the emerging feudal system in Japan. The samurai were bound to their lords by a system of loyalty and service, but this relationship was also reciprocal. The lords were expected to protect their vassals and reward them with land or wealth for their military service. As the power of the samurai grew, so did their influence in the political arena. Two of the most powerful clans in Japan at the time were the Taira, Haika, and the Minamoto Genji, both of whom had strong military forces and significant influence at the imperial court. These clans would come to dominate Japanese politics, and their rivalry would culminate in a series of conflicts that marked the beginning of Japan's medieval period. The rise of the Taira clan in the late 12th century signaled the increasing dominance of military families in Japanese politics. The head of the Taira clan, Taira no Kayamori, was a powerful and ambitious leader who managed to secure key positions within the imperial court. By marrying his daughter into the imperial family and placing his allies in important positions, Kayamori effectively controlled the court and manipulated imperial politics to his advantage. His rise to power symbolized the decline of the Fujiwara clan and the aristocratic dominance that had characterized much of the Heian period. However, Kayamori's aggressive tactics and accumulation of power earned him many enemies, including the rival Minamoto clan. The Minamoto were another powerful warrior family, and tensions between the two clans eventually erupted into open conflict in 1180. This conflict, known as the Genpei War, would prove to be a decisive turning point in Japanese history, marking the transition from aristocratic rule to the age of the samurai. The Genpei War, 1180 to 1185, was a brutal civil war fought between the Taira and Minamoto clans for control of Japan. It was not just a struggle for political power but also a clash between two competing visions of governance. The Taira, who sought to maintain control over the imperial court and the existing aristocratic order, and the Minamoto, who represented the rising power of the samurai and a new military-led form of governance. The war was fought across various parts of Japan, with both sides engaging in pitched battles and skirmishes, often involving large numbers of samurai warriors. One of the key figures in the Minamoto clan was Minamoto no Yoritamo, who had been exiled by the Taira as a young man but returned to lead his family's forces in the war. Yoritamo was a skilled military leader and tactician, and under his command, the Minamoto forces gradually gained the upper hand. After several years of fighting, the Minamoto delivered a decisive blow to the Taira at the Battle of Dan-no-Yura in 1185, a naval battle that saw the destruction of the Taira fleet and the death of many of its leaders, including the young Emperor Entoku, who drowned during the battle. The victory of the Minamoto clan in the Genpei War marked the end of the Taira's dominance and the beginning of a new era in Japanese history. Minamoto no Yoritamo emerged as the most powerful figure in Japan, and in 1192, he was granted the title of Sei Tai Shogun, barbarian subduing generalissimo, by the emperor. This marked the official beginning of the Bakufu or shogunate, a military government that would rule Japan for the next several centuries. The establishment of the Kamakura shogunate under Yoritamo signaled the start of Japan's medieval period. Although the emperor remained a symbolic figurehead in Kyoto, real political power now rested in the hands of the shogun and his samurai vassals. The shogunate was based in Kamakura, far from the imperial court, reflecting the shift in power from the aristocracy to the military class. The Kamakura shogunate created a feudal system in which land was distributed to loyal samurai in exchange for military service, and local lords, or daimyo, governed their territories with considerable autonomy. Yoritamo's rise to power also marked the beginning of a new political structure in Japan, where the military and civil authority were separated. While the emperor continued to serve as the spiritual and cultural leader of Japan, the shogun exercised actual control over the government and military affairs. This division of power created a system of dual governance that would remain a defining feature of Japanese politics throughout the medieval period. In addition to its political implications, the rise of the samurai had a profound impact on Japanese society and culture. The samurai were more than just warriors. They were also the bearers of a new code of ethics known as Bushido, or the Way of the Warrior. Bushido emphasized loyalty, honor, and personal bravery, as well as a commitment to martial training and self-discipline. Samurai were expected to live by this code, and their reputation as warriors depended not only on their skill in battle but also on their adherence to these principles. The rise of the samurai class also had a significant influence on Japanese art, literature, and religion. Zen Buddhism, which had been introduced to Japan from China in the 12th century, became particularly popular among the samurai. Zen's emphasis on discipline, meditation, and direct experience resonated with the samurai's warrior ethos, and many samurai adopted Zen practices as part of their training and spiritual development. Zen also had a profound impact on Japanese culture, influencing the development of the tea ceremony, ink painting, and garden design, all of which would come to be associated with the refined aesthetics of the samurai class. The Kamakura period, 1185 to 1333, saw the consolidation of the samurai class and the establishment of a stable military government, but it also laid the foundation for future conflicts. The power of the shogunate was not absolute, and over time, tensions between different samurai factions and regional lords would create new challenges for the shogunate's authority. These internal divisions, combined with external threats such as the Mongol invasions, would eventually lead to the decline of the Kamakura shogunate and the rise of new military powers. The establishment of the Kamakura shogunate in 1192 marked the official start of Japan's medieval period, a time when military rule, rather than imperial court control, dominated the political landscape. Minamoto no Yoritomo's victory over the Taira clan and his rise to power as Seii Tai shogun, barbarian subduing generalissimo, ushered in a new era where the samurai class would hold sway over Japan for centuries. While the emperor remained in Kyoto as a symbolic figurehead, real authority rested with the shogun and his samurai vassals based in Kamakura, a city that became the new center of power. After defeating the Taira clan and establishing the Kamakura shogunate, Yoritomo worked to consolidate his power over Japan. He sought to create a system of governance that was based on the loyalty of his vassals, or gokunin, who were awarded land in exchange for their military service. This system of feudalism, which had already begun to take shape during the Heian period, became more formalized under Yoritomo's leadership. The gokunin were expected to provide military support to the shogun and maintain order in their territories, while the shogunate in Kamakura acted as the central authority that mediated disputes and enforced laws. One of the key institutions Yoritomo established to maintain control over his vast network of samurai was the shogo, or military governors. The shogo were appointed by the shogunate to oversee the provinces and ensure that the gokunin were fulfilling their duties. These military governors played a crucial role in maintaining law and order in the provinces, and they acted as the shogun's representatives in regions far from Kamakura. Over time, the shogo would gain significant power and influence, often becoming de facto rulers of their provinces. Yoritomo's success in creating a stable government was based on a careful balance of power between the central authority of the shogunate and the autonomy of the regional samurai lords. However, his death in 1199 created a power vacuum that left the Kamakura shogunate vulnerable to internal strife. Yoritomo's two sons, Yori and Sanetomo, were both too young and inexperienced to maintain the same level of authority their father had held. Yori, the eldest, became shogun after Yoritomo's death but was deposed in 1203, and Sanetomo was assassinated in 1219, ending the direct line of the Minamoto clan. Following the death of Yoritomo's sons, real power shifted into the hands of the Hojo family, who had been powerful allies of the Minamoto. The Hojo clan, led by Hojo Tokumasa, established a regency system in which they effectively ruled Japan on behalf of the shogun. The Hojo regents, though not officially shoguns themselves, held the reins of power and controlled the shogunate for over a century. Under their leadership, the Kamakura shogunate became more stable, but it also faced significant challenges. One of the most significant external threats to the Kamakura shogunate came in the form of the Mongol invasions. In the late 13th century, the Mongol Empire, under the leadership of Kublai Khan, sought to expand its dominion to Japan. By this time, the Mongols had already conquered much of China, Korea, and Central Asia, and Kublai Khan viewed Japan as a logical next target for expansion. He sent emissaries to Japan demanding submission, but the Kamakura shogunate, confident in its strength, refused. In response, Kublai Khan launched two major invasion attempts. The first Mongol invasion occurred in 1274 when a large Mongol fleet set sail from Korea with tens of thousands of soldiers, including Mongols, Chinese, and Koreans. The Mongol forces landed on the island of Kyushu, where they encountered fierce resistance from Japanese samurai, who fought valiantly despite being outnumbered. The samurai, used to single combat in their traditional style of warfare, were initially unprepared for the Mongols' more organized and aggressive tactics, which included the use of gunpowder weapons such as bombs. However, after several days of fighting, a sudden and powerful storm, known as a kamikaze, divine wind, struck the Mongol fleet, causing massive damage and forcing the invaders to retreat. The Japanese credited their victory to divine intervention, believing that the gods had protected their islands from foreign conquest. Despite their initial failure, the Mongols did not give up their ambitions to conquer Japan, and Kublai Khan ordered preparations for a second invasion. The second Mongol invasion, launched in 1281, was even larger than the first. This time, the Mongols assembled two massive fleets, one sailing from China and the other from Korea, with a combined force of over 140,000 soldiers and sailors. The Japanese, having learned from the first invasion, had spent the intervening years fortifying their defenses along the coast of Kyushu, building stone walls and reinforcing their garrisons. When the Mongol fleet arrived, they were met with stiff resistance from the Japanese defenders, who fought tenaciously to repel the invaders. Once again, however, nature played a decisive role. After weeks of stalemate, another kamikaze struck the Mongol fleet, devastating their ships and forcing the survivors to abandon the invasion. The second Mongol invasion had been even more costly than the first, both for the Mongols and for the Japanese, who had expended significant resources defending their homeland. The failure of the Mongol invasions not only solidified the reputation of the samurai as formidable warriors but also reinforced the idea that Japan was protected by divine forces. Despite their military success against the Mongols, the Kamakura shogunate faced significant internal challenges in the aftermath of the invasions. The cost of defending Japan had placed a heavy burden on the shogunate's finances, and many of the samurai who had fought in the invasions were left without sufficient rewards for their service. This led to growing discontent among the Gokunin, who had come to expect land or wealth in return for their loyalty. The Hojo regents, who controlled the shogunate, struggled to meet these demands, and this dissatisfaction began to erode their authority. At the same time, the shogunate's power was being challenged by the imperial court in Kyoto. Although the emperor remained a largely symbolic figurehead, some members of the imperial family sought to regain political power. In particular, Emperor Go-Daigo, 1288 to 1339, who reigned from 1318 to 1339, became a vocal critic of the Kamakura shogunate and sought to restore direct imperial rule over Japan. Go-Daigo's ambitions set the stage for a major conflict between the imperial court and the shogunate. In 1331, Emperor Go-Daigo launched a rebellion against the Kamakura shogunate, marking the beginning of the Kenmu Restoration. Go-Daigo's forces were initially defeated, and he was exiled, but the rebellion continued with the support of several powerful samurai, including Ashikaga Takauji, a key military leader who had initially fought for the shogunate but later switched sides. In 1333, Ashikaga Takauji and his forces captured Kamakura and overthrew the Hojo regents, bringing an end to the Kamakura shogunate. The fall of the Kamakura shogunate in 1333 marked the end of one phase of Japan's medieval period, but it also signaled the beginning of a new era of conflict and power struggles. Although Emperor Go-Daigo briefly restored imperial rule during the Kenmu Restoration, his efforts to centralize power in the hands of the emperor were short-lived. Within a few years, Ashikaga Takauji, the very samurai who had helped him overthrow the shogunate, turned against him and established a new military government, the Ashikaga shogunate. The fall of the Kamakura shogunate in 1333 did not bring the stability that many had hoped for. Instead, it marked the beginning of a new period of political turmoil, as Japan was once again caught between competing forces for power. Emperor Go-Daigo, who had successfully overthrown the Kamakura shogunate with the help of powerful samurai like Ashikaga Takauji, sought to restore direct imperial rule during what became known as the Kenmu Restoration. However, Go-Daigo's vision for a strong imperial government was short-lived, as his failure to satisfy the ambitions of the samurai class led to his downfall. Go-Daigo's efforts to centralize power in the imperial court alienated many of the samurai who had supported him during the rebellion. Instead of rewarding them with lands and titles, Go-Daigo sought to reassert the dominance of the aristocratic court over the warrior class. This decision angered many of his samurai allies, particularly Ashikaga Takauji, who had expected to be richly rewarded for his role in overthrowing the Kamakura shogunate. Ashikaga Takauji, a member of a powerful samurai family, had initially fought on behalf of the Kamakura shogunate during Emperor Go-Daigo's rebellion. However, he switched sides after seeing an opportunity to seize power for himself. After overthrowing the Kamakura regime and helping Go-Daigo return to the throne, Takauji quickly became disillusioned with the emperor's plans for restoring imperial authority. Takauji, like many other samurai leaders, believed that the warrior class should be the true rulers of Japan, not the aristocratic courtiers in Kyoto. In 1335, tensions between Ashikaga Takauji and Go-Daigo erupted into open conflict. Takauji raised an army and marched on Kyoto, defeating imperial forces and driving Go-Daigo into exile. Takauji then installed a rival emperor, Emperor Komio, as a puppet ruler, and in 1338, he declared himself Sei Tai-shogun, establishing the Ashikaga shogunate, also known as the Muromachi shogunate, after the Muromachi district of Kyoto, where the new government was headquartered. This marked the beginning of the Muromachi period, 1336 to 1573, a time characterized by both cultural flourishing and political instability. The Ashikaga shogunate represented a continuation of the military-led government established by the Kamakura shogunate, but it differed in several key ways. Unlike the Kamakura shoguns, who ruled from the eastern city of Kamakura, the Ashikaga shoguns based their government in Kyoto, closer to the imperial court. This proximity to the court allowed the Ashikaga shoguns to exert more direct control over the emperor, while still maintaining the appearance of imperial legitimacy. However, this closeness also led to frequent conflicts between the shogunate and the imperial family, as well as between rival samurai factions. The early years of the Ashikaga shogunate were marked by a series of conflicts known as the Nanbo-Kucho, Southern and Northern Courts period, which lasted from 1336 to 1392. During this time, Japan was divided between two competing imperial courts: the Northern Court, backed by the Ashikaga shogunate, and the Southern Court, led by Emperor Go-Daigo and his descendants, who sought to reclaim the throne from their base in the southern region of Yoshino. This division between the northern and southern courts created a prolonged period of civil war, as both sides vied for control over Japan. Although the Ashikaga shogunate held the upper hand for much of the Nanbo-Kucho period, the southern court, under Emperor Go-Daigo's successors, continued to resist Ashikaga rule. The conflict eventually ended in 1392 when the southern court was persuaded to submit to the authority of the northern court, effectively reunifying the imperial line under Ashikaga control. However, the Nanbo-Kucho period had weakened both the imperial family and the shogunate, leaving Japan in a precarious political situation. Despite the political instability of the early Muromachi period, it was also a time of significant cultural development, particularly in the arts and religion. The Ashikaga shogunate, under leaders like Ashikaga Yoshimitsu, 1358 to 1408, became patrons of the arts, fostering the growth of no theater, ink painting, tea ceremony, and garden design. Kyoto, despite its political turmoil, remained a vibrant cultural center, and many of the artistic achievements of the Muromachi period were influenced by Zen Buddhism, which had become increasingly popular among the samurai class. Ashikaga Yoshimitsu, who became shogun in 1368, is often credited with bringing a brief period of stability to Japan during the Muromachi period. He played a crucial role in ending the Nanbo-Kucho conflict by negotiating the reunification of the imperial courts in 1392, and he used his political acumen to strengthen the authority of the shogunate. Yoshimitsu is also remembered for his cultural contributions, particularly the construction of the Golden Pavilion, Kinkakuji, one of the most iconic landmarks in Japan. Under his rule, the Muromachi period saw a flourishing of cultural exchange with China, and the shogunate established strong diplomatic and trade relations with the Ming dynasty. However, even during Yoshimitsu's reign, cracks in the political structure of the shogunate were becoming apparent. The Ashikaga shogunate never had the same level of centralized control as the Kamakura shogunate, and many regional daimyo, feudal lords, maintained significant autonomy over their territories. This decentralized system of governance left the Ashikaga shogunate vulnerable to internal divisions and power struggles, particularly as the authority of successive shoguns weakened over time. After Yoshimitsu's death in 1408, the Ashikaga shogunate began to decline, as it faced increasing challenges from powerful regional warlords. The weakening of central authority led to a period of feudal fragmentation, as local daimyo became more independent and sought to expand their power at the expense of the shogunate. This period of political fragmentation set the stage for one of the most chaotic and violent eras in Japanese history, the Sengoku period, or Warring States period. By the mid-15th century, the authority of the Ashikaga shogunate had been severely undermined, and Japan descended into a state of near-constant warfare. The Unin War, 1467 to 1477, a decade-long conflict over succession disputes within the Ashikaga family, marked the beginning of the Sengoku period. Although the Unin War was initially a struggle between rival factions within the Ashikaga shogunate, it soon spiraled into a larger conflict that engulfed much of Japan. The war devastated Kyoto, reducing the city to ruins, and left the Ashikaga shogunate effectively powerless. With the collapse of central authority, regional daimyo emerged as the dominant political and military figures in Japan. These warlords controlled their own armies of samurai and governed their territories as autonomous rulers. The Sengoku period was characterized by constant warfare between rival daimyo, each of whom sought to expand their domain and increase their influence. This era of feudal warfare would continue for over a century, as Japan remained divided into competing fiefdoms with no clear central authority. The decline of the Ashikaga shogunate and the rise of the daimyo fundamentally altered the political landscape of Japan during the late medieval period. While the Ashikaga shoguns had once ruled from the cultural and political center of Kyoto, power had now shifted to the provinces, where ambitious warlords vied for control. Despite the chaos and violence of the Sengoku period, this era also saw significant social and economic changes. As new trade networks developed, castle towns grew, and the power of the merchant class increased. In conclusion, the Ashikaga shogunate, though initially successful in establishing a new military government, ultimately failed to maintain control over Japan. The political fragmentation of the Muromachi period, combined with the rise of powerful regional daimyo, led to the collapse of central authority and the onset of the Sengoku period. As Japan entered this new phase of its medieval history, the country would experience a century of warfare and upheaval before the eventual reunification under the Tokugawa shogunate. The Sengoku period, 1467 to 1615, is often referred to as the Warring States period in Japanese history, a time when the central authority of the Ashikaga shogunate crumbled, and regional warlords, daimyo, fought for dominance over a fractured Japan. This period of intense internal conflict was one of the most turbulent in Japan's medieval history, characterized by nearly a century and a half of warfare, political intrigue, shifting alliances, and power struggles. The Sengoku period saw the emergence of some of Japan's most legendary military leaders, as well as significant social, cultural, and economic changes. The collapse of the Ashikaga shogunate had left a power vacuum in the central government, and local daimyo began to assert their independence. These warlords controlled their own armies of samurai, fortified their territories with castles, and governed as autonomous rulers. Without a strong central government to maintain order, Japan became a patchwork of competing fiefdoms, each ruled by a daimyo who sought to expand his influence and territory. The Sengoku period began in earnest with the Unin War, 1467 to 1477, a conflict that arose over a succession dispute within the Ashikaga family. Although the war started as a relatively localized struggle in Kyoto, it quickly escalated into a nationwide conflict as rival daimyo took sides and used the chaos to advance their own interests. The Unin War had devastating consequences for Kyoto, which was left in ruins after years of fighting. The once great capital of Japan was reduced to a shadow of its former self, and the Ashikaga shogunate, already weakened, effectively lost any remaining authority over the country. With Kyoto in ruins and the central government powerless, the country descended into a period of localized warfare, with individual daimyo vying for control of neighboring territories. During the Sengoku period, the primary focus of the daimyo was territorial expansion. The loyalty of the samurai class was essential to a daimyo's success, and military prowess became the defining factor in political power. As regional lords sought to expand their domains, castles became central to military strategy. These fortified structures were built throughout Japan, often in strategic locations such as mountaintops or along key trade routes. Castles served as both military strongholds and administrative centers, where the daimyo could control the surrounding region and coordinate their military campaigns. As warfare intensified, many of the smaller and weaker daimyo were absorbed by more powerful neighbors, creating a landscape dominated by a few major military powers. Among the most powerful figures to emerge during this period were Takeda Shingen, Yasuji Kenshin, Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu, names that would come to define the final stages of the Sengoku period. One of the earliest and most prominent military leaders of the Sengoku period was Takeda Shingen, 1521 to 1573, the head of the Takeda clan and one of the most formidable warlords of the era. Shingen was known for his military brilliance and his ability to outmaneuver his rivals on the battlefield. His chief rival was Yasuji Kenshin, 1530 to 1578, the head of the Yasuji clan, who was also a highly skilled military commander. The rivalry between Takeda Shingen and Yasuji Kenshin became legendary, particularly after their famous series of battles at Kawanakajima, which resulted in several inconclusive but fiercely fought engagements. The battles between these two daimyo were a symbol of the intense competition that characterized the Sengoku period, as each sought to expand their territory and gain dominance over central Japan. While Takeda Shingen and Yasuji Kenshin fought in the north and central regions of Japan, another ambitious daimyo was rising to power in the west, Oda Nobunaga, 1534 to 1582. Nobunaga would become one of the most important figures in Japanese history, remembered for his ruthless tactics and his vision of uniting Japan under his rule. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Nobunaga understood that traditional samurai warfare, which emphasized personal combat and honor, was no longer effective in an age of mass armies and new technologies. He adopted new military strategies, including the use of firearms, which had been introduced to Japan by Portuguese traders in 1543. Nobunaga's most significant military achievement came in 1560, at the Battle of Okahazama, where he defeated the much larger army of Imagawa Yoshimoto. Despite being vastly outnumbered, Nobunaga used a surprise attack to rout the Imagawa forces, a victory that solidified his reputation as a brilliant and unconventional military leader. After this victory, Nobunaga began to systematically expand his territory, conquering much of central Japan and eliminating rival daimyo. Nobunaga's ambition extended beyond mere territorial expansion. He sought to bring an end to the constant warfare of the Sengoku period and unify Japan under his rule. In 1568, he marched on Kyoto and deposed the sitting shogun, Ashikaga Yoshiaki, effectively bringing an end to the Ashikaga shogunate. Although Nobunaga did not officially take the title of shogun, he ruled as Japan's de facto leader, using his military power and political acumen to bring more regions under his control. Nobunaga was a ruthless leader, known for his willingness to crush anyone who stood in his way. He was also a visionary who sought to modernize Japan, introducing new forms of governance and encouraging trade with foreign countries, particularly Portugal and Spain. Nobunaga's embrace of Western firearms, along with his strategic use of alliances and brutal suppression of opposition, allowed him to make significant progress toward unifying Japan. However, his reign was cut short in 1582 when he was betrayed by one of his own generals, Akechi Mitsuhide, and forced to commit seppuku, ritual suicide, at Honnoji Temple in Kyoto. After Nobunaga's death, his efforts to unify Japan were continued by one of his most trusted generals, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, 1537 to 1598. Hideyoshi, who rose from humble origins as a peasant to become one of Japan's most powerful daimyo, proved to be a brilliant military leader and an astute politician. After avenging Nobunaga's death by defeating Akechi Mitsuhide, Hideyoshi set about completing the task of unifying Japan. By 1590, Hideyoshi had succeeded in bringing nearly all of Japan under his control, becoming the undisputed ruler of the country. Unlike Nobunaga, who had relied heavily on military force, Hideyoshi used a combination of diplomacy, strategic marriage alliances, and administrative reforms to consolidate his power. He implemented a series of land surveys and tax reforms that helped stabilize the economy and centralize authority. Hideyoshi also disarmed the peasantry, implementing the sword hunt to ensure that only the samurai class could bear arms. Despite his achievements in unifying Japan, Hideyoshi's ambitions extended beyond the Japanese islands. In 1592, he launched an ill-fated invasion of Korea, with the ultimate goal of conquering China. Although his armies initially made progress, they were eventually pushed back by a combination of Korean resistance and Chinese reinforcements from the Ming dynasty. The Korean campaigns drained Japan's resources and weakened Hideyoshi's control over the daimyo. And after his death in 1598, his ambitious foreign policy came to an abrupt end. With Hideyoshi's death, Japan once again faced the prospect of political fragmentation. Hideyoshi's young son, Toyotomi Hideyori, was too young to effectively rule, and a power struggle ensued between Hideyoshi's loyalists and those who sought to seize power for themselves. Among these ambitious figures was Tokugawa Ieyasu, 1543 to 1616, a daimyo from the eastern region of Japan who had been a close ally of both Nobunaga and Hideyoshi. Ieyasu, a patient and calculating leader, saw an opportunity to take control of Japan and bring an end to the Sengoku period. In 1600, Tokugawa Ieyasu's forces decisively defeated the opposition at the Battle of Sekigahara, one of the most important battles in Japanese history. The victory at Sekigahara allowed Ieyasu to establish himself as the dominant figure in Japan, and in 1603, he was appointed Sei Tai Shogun, officially marking the beginning of the Tokugawa shogunate. Under Ieyasu's rule, Japan would finally achieve the stability that had eluded it during the Sengoku period, bringing an end to centuries of warfare and ushering in the Edo period, a time of relative peace and isolation. The conclusion of the Sengoku period and the rise of Tokugawa Ieyasu in the early 17th century marked the end of centuries of warfare that had characterized Japan's medieval era. With the decisive victory at the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, Ieyasu had solidified his position as the most powerful daimyo in Japan. The battle not only established his dominance but also paved the way for the creation of a new political order, the Tokugawa shogunate, that would bring peace and stability to Japan for more than 2.5 centuries. The Tokugawa shogunate, or Edo period, 1603 to 1868, is often seen as the beginning of early modern Japan, but its roots lay in the medieval traditions of samurai rule, feudal relationships, and decentralized governance. However, unlike the chaotic Sengoku period, where regional warlords constantly vied for power, the Tokugawa era was marked by a rigidly structured society, centralized authority, and strict control over both the military class and the broader population. After the Battle of Sekigahara, Ieyasu moved quickly to consolidate his power and secure his rule over Japan. In 1603, the emperor appointed Ieyasu as Sei Tai Shogun, giving him the authority to govern the country on behalf of the imperial court. Although the title of shogun had been used by previous military leaders like the Kamakura and Ashikaga shoguns, Ieyasu's rise to power marked a new era in Japanese governance. Unlike his predecessors, Ieyasu established a centralized and highly organized system of government that allowed him to maintain control over the entire country while keeping the daimyo in check. One of Ieyasu's key strategies for maintaining control was the Bakuhan system, a form of feudalism that balanced the power between the central government, Bakufu, in Edo, modern-day Tokyo, and the regional domains, Han, ruled by daimyo. Under this system, the country was divided into more than 250 domains, each ruled by a daimyo, who were responsible for governing their own territories and maintaining their own armies. However, the daimyo were required to pledge loyalty to the shogun, and they were subject to strict rules designed to prevent any one of them from becoming too powerful. One of the most effective tools Ieyasu used to control the daimyo was the sankenkotai system, also known as the alternate attendance system. Under this policy, the daimyo were required to spend every other year in Edo, the capital of the shogunate, where they and their families were kept under the watchful eye of the shogun. During the years when they were allowed to return to their own domains, the daimyo were required to leave their families behind in Edo as hostages, ensuring their loyalty to the shogunate. This system not only prevented the daimyo from building up independent power bases, but also encouraged the development of a strong centralized government in Edo. In addition to maintaining control over the daimyo, Ieyasu worked to re-establish order in Japanese society, which had been deeply disrupted by the long years of war. The Tokugawa shogunate implemented a strict social hierarchy that divided the population into four main classes: samurai, farmers, artisans, and merchants. The samurai, who had traditionally been the warrior class, retained their privileged status at the top of this hierarchy, but under the Tokugawa shogunate, they were transformed from warriors into bureaucrats and administrators. As Japan entered a period of relative peace, the role of the samurai shifted from fighting on the battlefield to governing the country and enforcing the laws of the shogunate. Below the samurai in the social hierarchy were the farmers, who were considered the backbone of the economy because they produced the rice that was the basis of the taxation system. Rice production was meticulously monitored by the government, and taxes were collected in the form of rice, which was then redistributed to the daimyo and samurai. Artisans and craftsmen, who created goods for both the samurai and the general population, occupied the next tier, while merchants, despite being economically important, were placed at the bottom of the hierarchy. The Tokugawa government viewed merchants with suspicion, as their wealth was not derived from labor or production but from trade, which was seen as less honorable than agriculture. While the Tokugawa shogunate was successful in bringing peace and stability to Japan, it also imposed strict controls over society and the economy. One of the most significant policies of the Tokugawa period was the Sengoku policy, or the closed country policy, which was implemented in the 1630s. This policy severely restricted Japan's contact with the outside world, particularly with European nations, which had been increasing their presence in East Asia during the 16th century. The Tokugawa shogunate feared that foreign influence, particularly Christianity, which had been introduced to Japan by Portuguese and Spanish missionaries, could destabilize Japanese society and undermine the authority of the shogunate. As a result, the Tokugawa government banned Christianity, expelled most foreign missionaries, and severely limited foreign trade. Only a few Dutch and Chinese merchants were allowed to trade with Japan, and they were confined to the island of Dejima in Nagasaki. The Sengoku policy effectively isolated Japan from the rest of the world for more than 2 centuries, preserving the shogunate's control over the country but also limiting Japan's exposure to new ideas and technologies. Despite the restrictions imposed by the Tokugawa government, the Edo period was a time of relative peace and prosperity for Japan. The long years of warfare that had defined the Sengoku period were finally over, and the Tokugawa shogunate provided a stable political structure that allowed for economic growth and cultural development. Commerce flourished, particularly in the urban centers of Edo, Osaka, and Kyoto, where merchants and artisans created vibrant markets for goods and services. The growth of the merchant class, while still technically at the bottom of the social hierarchy, contributed to the rise of a new urban culture that included popular forms of entertainment such as kabuki theater, ukiyo-e woodblock prints, and haiku poetry. In addition to its economic and cultural achievements, the Tokugawa period also saw significant developments in the fields of education and scholarship. The samurai, who had been transformed into bureaucrats, were expected to be well educated in Confucian principles, which emphasized loyalty, filial piety, and social order. The Tokugawa shogunate promoted Neo-Confucianism as the official ideology of the state, and schools were established to educate the sons of samurai in both martial and scholarly disciplines. The promotion of learning extended beyond the samurai class, and literacy rates in Japan increased during the Edo period, particularly in urban areas. However, the peace and stability of the Tokugawa period came at a cost. The rigid social hierarchy and strict control over the daimyo meant that there was little room for social mobility or political dissent. The daimyo were forced to spend enormous sums of money on maintaining their alternate attendance in Edo, which strained their finances and weakened their power. Additionally, the Sengoku policy, while successful in preserving the shogunate's control over Japan, also isolated the country from the rapid technological and military advancements that were taking place in Europe and other parts of the world. By the mid-19th century, the Tokugawa shogunate began to face new challenges, both from within Japan and from foreign powers. Economic problems, social unrest, and the growing discontent of the daimyo and samurai contributed to the weakening of the shogunate. At the same time, Western powers, particularly the United States, began to pressure Japan to open its ports to foreign trade. In 1853, American Commodore Matthew Perry arrived in Japan with a fleet of warships, demanding that Japan open its borders to trade with the West. This encounter, known as the Black Ships Incident, marked the beginning of the end for the Tokugawa shogunate. In conclusion, the rise of the Tokugawa shogunate brought an end to Japan's medieval period and ushered in a new era of peace, stability, and cultural flourishing. Tokugawa Ieyasu's careful balancing of power through the Bakuhan system, combined with the Sengoku and Sengoku policies, allowed the shogunate to maintain control over Japan for more than 250 years. However, the very policies that had ensured stability also contributed to the eventual decline of the Tokugawa regime, as internal pressures and foreign threats began to erode the foundations of the shogunate. The end of the Tokugawa period in the mid-19th century would bring about the Meiji Restoration, marking the beginning of Japan's modernization and the end of its feudal past. By the early 19th century, the Tokugawa shogunate, which had ruled Japan for over 200 years, began to show signs of weakness. Although the Bakuhan system established by Tokugawa Ieyasu had successfully maintained peace and stability for centuries, the rigid social and political order that characterized the Edo period was becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. Economic hardships, social unrest, and growing dissatisfaction among the daimyo and samurai created a volatile environment, while foreign powers pressed Japan to open its doors to international trade. One of the key factors contributing to the decline of the Tokugawa shogunate was economic strain. The Sengoku system, which required daimyo to maintain alternate residences in Edo, placed a heavy financial burden on the regional lords. The constant travel, construction of lavish residences, and the need to support large retinues of samurai during their time in the capital drained the resources of many daimyo families. Over time, the daimyo became increasingly indebted to wealthy merchant families, leading to a shift in economic power from the samurai class to the merchant class, despite the merchants' low status in the social hierarchy. At the same time, rural areas experienced growing economic hardship. The Tokugawa tax system was based on rice production, and farmers were required to pay a significant portion of their harvest as taxes to the samurai class. However, fluctuations in crop yields, combined with natural disasters such as famines and floods, left many peasants struggling to survive. As a result, peasant uprisings became more frequent during the late Edo period, with many farmers protesting heavy taxation, poor living conditions, and the abuses of local officials. The samurai class, which had once been the backbone of the shogunate's military power, was also facing difficulties. As Japan entered a period of prolonged peace, many samurai found themselves without the opportunity to fight or demonstrate their military skills. Instead, they were expected to serve as bureaucrats and administrators, roles that did not align with the traditional samurai ethos of Bushido, the way of the warrior. With many samurai unable to adjust to this new reality, discontent grew, especially among the lower-ranking samurai or ronin, who were left without a clear role in society. As internal pressures mounted, Japan also faced increasing pressure from foreign powers. Since the implementation of the Sengoku, closed country, policy in the 1630s, Japan had maintained a strict policy of isolation from the outside world, allowing limited trade only with the Dutch and Chinese through the port of Nagasaki. However, by the mid-19th century, Western nations, particularly the United States, were eager to establish trade relations with Japan. The rapid industrialization and expansion of Western powers made Japan's isolation increasingly untenable. In 1853, American Commodore Matthew Perry arrived in Japan with a fleet of black ships and demanded that Japan open its ports to American trade. Perry's arrival was a turning point in Japanese history, as the Tokugawa shogunate was ill-prepared to confront the military and technological superiority of the West. After a year of negotiations, the shogunate reluctantly agreed to sign the Treaty of Kanagawa in 1854, which opened 2 Japanese ports to American ships and established diplomatic relations between Japan and the United States. The signing of the Treaty of Kanagawa marked the end of Japan's centuries-long policy of isolation, but it also triggered a period of political turmoil. The treaty was followed by similar agreements with other Western nations, including Britain, France, and Russia, which established more unequal treaties that further opened Japan to foreign trade and granted extraterritorial rights to Westerners. These treaties were deeply unpopular among the Japanese public, and many samurai and daimyo saw them as a humiliating surrender to foreign powers. The opening of Japan to foreign influence exacerbated the already growing discontent within the country, leading to the rise of anti-shogun movements. Many daimyo, particularly those from powerful southern domains such as Satsuma and Choshu, began to question the legitimacy of the Tokugawa shogunate. These daimyo formed alliances with disaffected samurai, scholars, and peasants who were unhappy with the shogunate's inability to protect Japan from foreign encroachment. The slogan Sano Joy, revere the emperor, expel the barbarians, became a rallying cry for those who sought to overthrow the shogunate and restore imperial rule. The political and social unrest culminated in the Boshin War, 1868 to 1869, a civil war between the forces loyal to the Tokugawa shogunate and those who supported the restoration of imperial authority. The conflict began in 1868 when the domains of Satsuma and Choshu, along with other anti-shogun factions, formed an alliance and declared their support for Emperor Meiji, the young emperor who had ascended to the throne in 1867. The imperial forces, backed by modernized armies equipped with Western weapons, quickly gained the upper hand against the shogunate's forces. The decisive battle of the Boshin War took place at Toba Fushimi in 1868, where the shogunate's army was defeated by the imperial forces. In the aftermath of this defeat, Tokugawa Yoshinobu, the last shogun, resigned and returned political power to the emperor, marking the official end of the Tokugawa shogunate. Although the war continued in northern Japan and Hokkaido, where the remaining shogunate loyalists made a final stand, the imperial forces emerged victorious, bringing an end to more than 260 years of Tokugawa rule. The victory of the imperial forces and the restoration of Emperor Meiji to power in 1868 marked the beginning of the Meiji Restoration, a period of rapid modernization and transformation for Japan. The Meiji government, led by reform-minded samurai and daimyo, sought to modernize Japan by adopting Western technology, military practices, and political institutions. The feudal system that had defined Japan for centuries was dismantled, and the daimyo were required to surrender their domains to the emperor. The samurai class, once the dominant force in Japanese society, was abolished, and a new conscript army was created to replace the samurai as the defenders of the nation. The Meiji Restoration represented a dramatic break from Japan's medieval past and its isolationist policies. The new government embarked on a series of reforms aimed at transforming Japan into a modern, industrialized nation. These reforms included the establishment of a constitutional government, the creation of a modern educational system, the development of a national infrastructure, and the promotion of industrialization. Japan's successful modernization during the Meiji period allowed it to emerge as a major world power by the early 20th century, but the rapid changes also led to significant social upheaval and the loss of traditional ways of life. The end of the Tokugawa shogunate and the Meiji Restoration marked the final chapter in Japan's medieval and early modern history. The collapse of the feudal system, the rise of imperial rule, and the opening of Japan to the world brought about profound changes that would shape the country's future. While the Meiji Restoration is often seen as the beginning of modern Japan, it was also the culmination of centuries of political and social evolution, as Japan transitioned from a medieval society dominated by the samurai to a modern, industrialized nation-state.